So this is my final project for biology. I wasn't quite sure on how to get the Panopto recorders, so this was my next best thing. So my final project is just going to be an introduction to kinesiology, going over some anatomy and the skeletal system. So just some terms and definitions. So anatomy is a branch of science that deals with the structural organization of living things, how they are built, and what they consist of. Now the anatomical position is very important and portrays the body in an upright position, standing at that, and face and feet are forward and palms as well are facing forward. Now there are anatomical planes, which is a series of imaginary flat surfaces running through the body, and it describes sections of the body and movement. Now, there are also anatomical axes, which are a series of imaginary lines which describe how rotation of the muscle and bones work. Now, the skeleton is the adult human skeleton is made up of 206 bones, accounting for about 14% of body weight. Now, there are two different types of skeleton, so I'm just going to briefly talk about both. So, the axial skeleton is comprised of mainly the vertebral column, much of the skull, and the thoracic cage, and the appendicular skeleton accounts for the movable limbs and supporting structures such as the appendicular skeleton plays a key role in allowing us to move about. So the anatomical position. So the anatomical position is universally accepted as the starting point for anatomical description and analysis. So that's why I said before it's very important. So again, some key features are the palms are supinated, you are facing forward, and feet are facing forward, as you can see in this image here, and you can see the back side of the image as well. So anatomical planes and axes. So the planes, there are sagittal, frontal, and transverse. So the sagittal plane divides the body into left and right sections. The frontal plane divides the body into front and back, and then the transverse describes the body into superior and inferior, or top and bottom. And now for the axis, there are longitudinal, horizontal, and anteroposterior. So the longitudinal axis is rotation from the direct middle, or just going from your cranium, middle of your cranium or your brain, and going straight down. So an example of that is like a ballerina spin. So horizontal would be the rotation parallel to the horizon. So it can be anywhere in your body, but this example is going from your hips, left to right through your hips. So an example of that would be like a somersault. And then so anterior posterior. Anteroposterior is going from front to back, and an example of that is like a cartwheel. So you're moving along that axis as you're going through different planes during that process. So just some movements involving the joints. So when you're sitting in a chair, or if you're just moving your arm, so extension is bringing it out, and flexion is bringing it in. So example for your leg, bringing it in and touching your butt, you are flexing that muscle. Now circumduction is basically just bringing your arm in a circle. And then so abduction and adduction. So abduction is bringing your arm away from the midline, and adduction is bringing it closer to the midline, which I'll go over in the next image just over here. Now rotation is just moving your head from side to side as an example. And then pronation is supination again. So supination is having your palms facing forward in the anatomical position, and then pronation would just be flipping them around. And now for your feet, you have dorsiflexion and plantar flexion. So dorsiflexion is bringing your toes up to try and like towards the sky, and then plantar flexion is trying to dig your toes into the ground and going up on your tippy toes. Now for your also, again, for your ankles, you have two different types of sprain, so this relates to that. You have an inversion sprain, which is medial, when your sole of your foot is facing the midline of your body, and it's more common. And then you have your eversion, or lateral, which is bringing your palm of or sole of your foot away from your body. And now, moving on to your jaw, you have protraction and retraction. So protraction is jutting out your jaw, and retraction, it would be bringing it back in. So here is just another image of pronation and supination, and just some rotation. Now you have depression and elevation. So when your jaw is being brought down, it's depression, and bringing it back up would be elevation. On to some terms of direction, which I've mentioned here, but I'm just going to go over it in better definitions here. So the midline is just exactly the middle of your body, and then superior and inferior just relates on how the, I believe it was the transverse, yes, the transverse plane splits your body in half. So if you were to split your body in half right here, your head would be superior to your toes, or sorry, yeah, your head would be superior to your toes, which are inferior. And then proximal and distal, so again with your example as your arm, your femur is proximal to your ulna, and then your ulna is distal to your humerus. And I said femur earlier, I'm sorry about that, but I'm talking about the humerus here. And then so lateral and medial, again, lateral just means away from the midline, and medial means to be closer to that midline. And anterior and posterior just relates to front and back. So I'm just going to go over the skeleton itself. So the axial and appendicular skeleton, you can see in the images here, as I related to earlier, the axial skeleton deals with your skull or your cranium, your thoracic slash rib cage, and then your vertebral column. And then the appendicular skeleton just deals with like your arms, your legs, your hips, your feet, your hands. So there's approximately 206 bones in the human body. Now I've heard that people tend to sometimes have an extra bone in your foot, but I believe this is just going off of an average. Now, when we are first born, however, we have 300 bones, which over time fuse together as we grow. Like in your brain, we have like different parts where our bones have fused together. Now, the axial skeleton is made up of 80 bones, and the appendicular skeleton is made up of approximately 126, accounting for the 206 bones in your body. Now, there are different types of bones. So we have the long bone, like the femur or the humerus, the short bone, like the metatarsals in your feet, like your lateral cuneiform, as you can see in this image here. We have a flat bone, which sternum, or your frontal bone in your brain, which tend to be smooth. And then we have an irregular bone, like your vertebrae. And then we have a sesamoid bone, like your patella. So anatomy of the long bone. So we have articular cartilage, which is located at both epiphyses of the bone, just at both ends here. So the proximal epiphysis just basically means it's closer to the axial skeleton. So I believe this image is relating to the humerus. No, sorry, not the humerus, the femur. And then for the distal epiphysis just means it's farther away from the axial skeleton. Now there is a metaphysis, which is the narrow portion between the epiphysis and the diaphysis, and then there's the diaphysis, which is the middle portion of the bone, as you can see here. Now within the bone we have spongy bone and compact bone. So the spongy bone is located just right here on this image, and it's for structural integrity as it endures more impact. So like say if we fall, this here helps us not to break our bone, whereas the compact bone is a thick part of the bone and it's for structural integrity. Now we have an epiphyseal line, which used to be a growth plate or the epiphyseal plate when we were younger, but as we grow older, it goes into the epiphyseal line because we have stopped growing. And then we have the medullary cavity, which is found inside the shaft of the bone and is filled with the red and yellow bone marrow. Now the red and yellow marrow is basically, so the red marrow is blood and the yellow marrow represents fat content. So up here you can see some red marrow and down here you can see some yellow bone marrow. And then we have the endosteum, which is a thin vascular membrane of connective tissue that lines the inner surface of the body's tissue that forms the medullary cavity along the bone, of the long bone, sorry. And then we have the periosteum, which is the outer connective tissue that covers the entire length of the bone and fibers of those of ligaments or tendons and unite to connect bone to bone or muscle to bone, as you can see just right here. And then here are some of my references for my image, as well as a reference to a textbook that I used to create this project. Have a great day.